It began, like every other morning, inside the walls of the palace with a calm that felt unshakable. The corridors were filled with the familiar rhythm of staff footsteps, the distant chime of clocks echoing across rooms steeped in history, and the quiet hum of tradition holding everything together. For Prince Harry, this had become the ordinary backdrop of an extraordinary life, one that he had fought to carve out with Meghan by his side. He thought he knew where his life was heading. He thought he knew what it meant to be a husband, a father, and a man who had chosen love over duty. But what he did not know, what he could not even imagine, was that everything he thought he understood about his own family was about to collapse in a way that would leave the monarchy reeling and the world gasping for answers. The public had always seen Archie as the golden thread binding Meghan and Harry's love story together, the little boy born into scrutiny, yet carrying with him the innocence of a new beginning. Every smile he gave, every milestone he reached was documented, photographed, and celebrated. To the world, Archie was a symbol of hope, of modernity, of the royal family embracing a new era. But behind the staged family portraits, beneath the carefully managed appearances, there was a secret that threatened not only to upend the Sussexes' lives, but to throw the monarchy itself into chaos. And when that secret surfaced, it would hit with the force of a bombshell. It didn't begin with scandal. It began with silence, Meghan's silence. A silence that grew heavier with each passing day until the weight of it could no longer be contained. She had carried it alone, tucked away behind her polished public image, hidden even from Harry, the man she had promised to share everything with. For months, perhaps even years, she convinced herself she could bury it forever. But secrets have a way of clawing to the surface, no matter how deeply you try to bury them. And when hers emerged, it came not as a whisper or a rumor, but as an undeniable, documented truth. A truth sealed in DNA results that no spin, no protocol, no palace machinery could erase. Imagine Harry's world in that moment. A man who had already endured the torment of losing his mother, the relentless intrusion of the media, and the strain of being the spare to the heir. Through all of it, he had clung to one anchor: his family. Meghan was his escape from the cold machinery of royal life. Archie was his redemption, the proof that love could survive scrutiny. But the revelation that Archie's biological father was not him, that the boy he had raised and adored was tied by blood to another man, was a wound too deep for words. And not just any man. A royal protection officer, a figure Harry had once trusted, a man whose very purpose had been to keep them safe, not to fracture their world. The confession did not explode in public first. It arrived quietly, intimately, as Meghan's trembling voice broke the stillness of a private evening. The palace had wound down for the night. Staff had retreated, corridors fell silent, and for once the couple had space to breathe. Harry expected warmth, conversation, perhaps laughter after a day of obligations. Instead, he was met with words that tore through him like glass. Meghan's eyes shimmered with tears, her voice low but resolute as she admitted the truth she had carried for so long. "Harry," she said, her voice unsteady, "there's something you need to know. When you were away, I was lonely." Those words, simple and unassuming on the surface, were the opening of a floodgate. They carried months of isolation, moments of fear, nights of feeling abandoned in a palace that never felt like home. They carried the story of her emotional bond with the one man who was always present when Harry was not. And in her trembling confession lay a reality Harry could never have prepared for: that Archie was not his biological son. For Meghan, the moment was both devastating and liberating. For Harry, it was the unraveling of the world he had built. The palace had no playbook for this. They were used to rumors, to scandals about affairs, to whispers of impropriety. But this was different. This wasn't about appearances or bad headlines. This was about lineage, about blood, about the very identity of a child born into the House of Windsor. The monarchy's survival depends on the illusion of order, of certainty, of unbroken lineage. And yet here, in the most private corners of their family, that illusion was shattered. The truth was too explosive to contain, and the fallout would be unlike anything they had faced before. For Harry, the immediate reaction was raw, human, and devastating. He didn't shout. He didn't rage. He walked out. He needed distance, air, space to breathe. His world had tilted on its axis, and he couldn't trust himself to stand still. Sources close to the family later whispered that he left the room pale, silent, barely able to look at Meghan. For hours, perhaps longer, he wandered the palace grounds, consumed by a storm of confusion, heartbreak, and disbelief. He loved Archie with every fiber of his being. Nothing could erase that but the knowledge that Archie's blood was not his, that the boy he had sworn to protect was the son of another man, was a wound deeper than any the tabloids could have inflicted. Inside the palace, the reaction was immediate and panicked. Advisors scrambled. Staff whispered in hushed voices. The family gathered in tense, closed-door meetings, their faces grim, their words clipped. This wasn't just a personal crisis. It was a constitutional nightmare. What would the public say? What would it mean for the royal image? And how could they contain something that had already been confirmed by DNA results? They had survived abdications, divorces, and scandals before. But never this. Never the question of a child's true parentage. And yet, beneath the layers of protocol and strategy, the story was heartbreakingly human. Meghan's confession was not one of malice, but of vulnerability. She had been lonely. She had been overwhelmed by the scrutiny of her new role, isolated within gilded walls that felt more like a cage than a home. Harry had been away, consumed by duties, speeches, tours, and appearances. And in that absence, Meghan had found solace in the one man who was always there, the protection officer whose presence was constant, whose duty was unwavering. What began as quiet conversations, as moments of empathy and understanding, blurred into something neither of them had anticipated. And in that moment of vulnerability, the course of their lives changed forever. The bodyguard himself had never intended to cross that line. Trained to remain professional, invisible, loyal, he had dedicated his life to shielding the royal family. But human connection can break even the strongest of barriers. Hours spent in proximity, moments of comfort offered in silence, conversations that delved deeper than protocol allowed. It was inevitable that something unspoken would form between them. And when it did, it carried consequences none of them could escape. For Harry, the revelation cut deeper because of who the man was. Not a stranger, not an outsider, but someone within their circle of trust, a man whose loyalty should have been beyond question. To know that this figure had fathered his son was almost unbearable. It wasn't just betrayal. It was an inversion of everything Harry believed about family, trust, and protection. And it left him standing at a crossroads, unsure whether to forgive, to fight, or to walk away altogether. The palace tried to contain the truth, but it was a losing battle. Whispers had already begun, fueled by insiders who couldn't keep silent. And when the DNA results were confirmed by sources familiar with the proceedings, the whispers grew louder. The media machine, relentless and ravenous, sensed blood. Headlines loomed. Speculation spiraled. Every photo of Archie was re-examined. Every smile, every gesture, every resemblance was picked apart. Could it be true? Was the boy everyone believed to be Harry's son the child of another man? And if so, what would it mean for the monarchy? As the world braced for answers, Harry faced his own private storm. The child he loved with every beat of his heart was innocent. Archie knew nothing of DNA, of betrayal, of scandal. To him, Harry was simply Dad. And Harry, despite everything, still felt that bond. But could he carry on as if nothing had changed? Could he forgive Meghan for a choice born of loneliness, or would the wound fester into something irreparable? These were not just questions of marriage. They were questions of identity, of fatherhood, of love itself. Meghan, for her part, was a picture of vulnerability. Her confession had not been easy. It had been born of fear, guilt, and the desperate need for honesty. She knew the consequences could destroy everything she had built with Harry, everything they had fought for together. But to remain silent was impossible. The truth would always find a way out. And now, with the DNA results in hand, there was no hiding from it. The palace corridors hummed with tension. Every whispered conversation carried weight. Every look was loaded with suspicion. Staff speculated, advisors strategized, and the royal family itself braced for the storm to break. They knew this was not a scandal they could spin away. This was a rupture at the core of their identity. And when the public found out, the monarchy would never be the same again. But at the heart of it all was a little boy, Archie. Innocent, unknowing, caught in a web of secrets and revelations he could not begin to understand. His childhood, his sense of family, his very identity would be shaped by the choices made in those corridors, by the decisions of adults grappling with love, betrayal, and truth. And it is that innocence, that fragility, that makes this story not just a scandal, but a tragedy. So we must ask ourselves, what comes next? Will Harry forgive Meghan, choosing love and loyalty over betrayal and heartbreak? Will the royal family close ranks, protecting their image even as their foundations crack? And what will become of Archie, the child at the center of a storm he never asked for? These questions linger in the air, unanswered, as the world waits for the next chapter. But one thing is certain, nothing will ever be the same again. Will ever be the same again. It began not with a headline or a scandal splashed across glossy covers, but with a whisper. A whisper that echoed down the polished marble corridors of Buckingham Palace, sliding beneath oak doors, slipping between silk curtains, and settling like poison in the quiet corners of royal life. The kind of whisper that usually died out as quickly as it spread. But this time, it didn't. This time, the whisper grew teeth. It took on shape, weight, and menace until it transformed from idle gossip into something darker. Something that would shatter one of the most carefully guarded illusions of the monarchy, the certainty of bloodline. At the center of it all was Archie, the little boy who had been presented to the world as the living proof of a new royal chapter, a symbol of love defying tradition. To the public, he was innocence itself, an adored child who represented change. But behind palace walls, Archie was becoming the subject of the most explosive rumor in royal history, that he was not, in fact, Prince Harry's son. At first, the notion was too absurd to entertain. Harry adored Archie with a fierceness the world could see in every photo. Meghan's smile was painted as maternal perfection, and together, they had weathered storms of tabloid criticism, racial undertones, and accusations of betrayal against the monarchy itself. But what the public never knew was that Meghan had been carrying a secret she had convinced herself she could bury forever. For months, perhaps even years, she had rehearsed silence like a performance, building walls around herself that even Harry could not breach. But silence has cracks, and through those cracks, truth seeps like water. No matter how hard you press it down, it rises. And this truth, one sealed by DNA, would not remain buried. Meghan's life inside the palace had never been the fairy tale she was promised. She had come into the family believing in a modern partnership, a chance to reshape the monarchy for the new century. Instead, she found herself trapped in a gilded cage, isolated and scrutinized from every angle. Every word was measured, every move dissected. Even her very presence was treated as a disruption to centuries of tradition. Loneliness, like a shadow, followed her through endless corridors. Harry, for all his love, was often absent, consumed by duty, by obligations he couldn't shed, by the constant tug-of-war between his wife and his family. Meghan had felt abandoned, unseen, and in that void, someone else slipped quietly into her world. A figure meant to protect her, to shield her from the storm outside the palace gates. Her royal protection officer, always present, always steady, always there when Harry was not. Their connection began as comfort, harmless conversations in the back of cars, hushed words in the shadows of hallways, small gestures that made her feel human again. But in the vacuum of loneliness, comfort became intimacy, and intimacy became something more. Meghan told herself it was fleeting, a mistake, a moment born out of fear and isolation. But months later, when she discovered she was pregnant, she buried the possibility of doubt deep inside herself. The world was watching. The family was watching. And most painfully of all, Harry was watching full of joy, never suspecting a thing. The guilt gnawed at her, but she convinced herself it didn't matter, that bloodlines were meaningless compared to love. that what made a father was not biology, but devotion, and for a time she believed she could live with that. Until the whisper began. Until someone inside the palace noticed small things. A look, a detail, a resemblance that didn't quite fit. And when those whispers reached ears that mattered, the machinery of the monarchy stirred into action. But the true collapse didn't come from the gossip. It came from Meghan herself. She had carried her secret for too long, and the weight of it was crushing. And so, one night, when the palace was quiet and Archie slept peacefully upstairs, she finally spoke. Harry had expected laughter, warmth, perhaps another evening of shared plans for their new life away from the suffocating grasp of the royal family. Instead, he was met with a tremor in Meghan's voice, a confession that made the air itself feel heavy. "Harry," she whispered, her eyes brimming with fear, "there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you long ago." Her words faltered, her breath quickened, and then, with a quiet force that would echo in his heart forever, she admitted the unthinkable. Archie was not his son. For Harry, the world tilted. His pulse roared in his ears, and yet he felt numb, detached, as if he were watching someone else's life implode. At first, he couldn't even process it. The woman he had given everything up for, titles, traditions, family ties, was telling him that the child he had loved since the moment he first held him was not bound to him by blood. Betrayal, heartbreak, disbelief. They all hit at once, colliding in a storm of emotions too vast to name. He didn't scream. He didn't rage. He walked out, silent, pale, shaken to his core. Outside, in the cold night air of the palace grounds, he wandered aimlessly, trying to breathe, trying to think, trying to stop the reel of images flashing in his mind. Every smile, every laugh, every bedtime story with Archie now replayed in his head with a new, unbearable question mark. Could he still call himself a father? Or had his entire world been built on a lie? Meghan sobbed behind closed doors. She had not confessed to wound him, but because she could no longer bear the burden of secrecy. She knew she had detonated a bomb, but in her heart she hoped, perhaps foolishly, that Harry's love would endure. That he would understand her loneliness, her desperation, the impossible circumstances that had driven her into another's arms. But Harry's silence was worse than rage. His absence in that moment told her everything. The foundation of their love had cracked. Inside the palace, the confession spread like wildfire. Meghan had confided in Harry, but secrets this seismic do not remain private for long. Staff overheard. Advisors pieced fragments together. And soon, the truth reached the ears of the very family Meghan and Harry had sought to keep at arm's length. The royal family gathered behind closed doors, their faces etched with fury, disbelief, and dread. For them, this was not just personal humiliation. This was an existential crisis. The monarchy is built on lineage, on the unbroken chain of blood that stretches back centuries. And now, in one devastating twist, that chain had been called into question. The palace advisors scrambled. How do you contain a truth like this? How do you spin the revelation that the child paraded before the world as a royal was, in fact, the son of a bodyguard? It was unthinkable, and yet it was undeniable. Because somewhere in those quiet, painful days that followed Meghan's confession, DNA results confirmed what she had admitted. The science was irrefutable. Archie was not Harry's biological child. The whispers were true. The monarchy's worst fear had materialized. The media caught scent quickly. First, it was speculation. Vague suggestions of unrest in the Sussex marriage, mysterious reports of fractures behind the scenes. Then, more pointed questions began to appear. Commentators noted Archie's features, online forums buzzed with comparisons, and tabloids hinted at a royal secret too shocking to print. But once the first leak emerged, once a palace insider confirmed that DNA testing had taken place, the dam burst. Headlines screamed betrayal. Talk shows devoted hours to speculation. And the world watched as Harry, Meghan, and little Archie became the center of a scandal that eclipsed anything the royal family had faced in living memory. Harry's pain was visible. Cameras caught him looking gaunt, distant, his once fiery gaze dulled by heartbreak. Meghan, meanwhile, was torn apart in the press. vilified as a deceiver, a schemer, a woman who had humiliated not just her husband, but the entire monarchy. The bodyguard, thrust unwillingly into the spotlight, was swiftly dismissed from his role. His life unraveled as the tabloids hounded him day and night. And at the center of this circus was Archie, a child too young to understand the chaos swirling around him, his innocence weaponized by a world hungry for scandal. Behind the palace gates, the fallout was catastrophic. The Queen, already frail, was said to be devastated. Prince William was livid, furious not only at Meghan but at Harry for bringing such chaos to the family's doorstep. The once unshakable institution trembled, because this was not a scandal they could outwait or outspin. This was blood. This was lineage. This was the core of everything they stood for. And the public, watching with equal parts fascination and horror, demanded answers. Would Harry disown Archie? Would Meghan be cast out? Would the monarchy survive the most intimate betrayal of all? For Harry, the question was not about the monarchy. It was about fatherhood. He knew, deep down, that no DNA test could sever the bond he had with Archie. He had been there for every milestone, every laugh, every tear. In his heart, Archie was his son. Biology be damned. But could he forgive Meghan? Could he look past the deception, the betrayal, the knowledge that another man had fathered the child he called his own? These were questions that haunted him day and night, tearing at the seams of his sanity. And Meghan? She was left stranded between worlds. Hated by the palace, vilified by the press, distrusted by the man she loved. Her confession, born out of desperation for honesty, had destroyed everything she had tried to protect. The marriage, the family, the image, all lay in ruins. And yet she clung to one fragile hope, that Harry would remember the love that had once united them, that he would see past the betrayal to the woman who had once been his escape from a life of duty and despair. Whether that hope was naive or brave, only time would tell. The scandal raged on. Each day brought new revelations, new angles, new twists. Commentators speculated on whether Meghan had planned the deception, whether the bodyguard had been her true love all along, whether Archie's future in the royal family was now erased. Palace insiders hinted at legal maneuvers, custody battles, even the possibility of stripping Archie of titles. It was chaos, unrelenting and merciless. And through it all, Harry stood at the center, torn between love and rage, loyalty and betrayal, fatherhood and truth. In the end, the scandal was more than a personal tragedy. It was a cultural earthquake. It exposed the fragility of the monarchy, the humanity of those within it, and the brutal hunger of a public that devours royal drama like theater. And as the dust settled, one chilling truth remained: the royal family would never be the same again. Because once the illusion of bloodline is broken, it can never truly be restored. And for Harry, for Meghan, for Archie, and for the monarchy itself, the story was no longer about fairy tales or happy endings. It was about survival in a world where love, betrayal, and truth collide in the most public way imaginable. The scandal was not just a chapter in royal history. It was a wound that would never fully heal. This is Crown and Controversy, unraveling the royals, one scandal at a time. Don't forget to subscribe.